This is the simple title sheet for the fourth of 4 Venice Women's History Tapes, March 1981, Women in Fine Arts. Again, several women could not attend, and there are those that did attend also.
Hello and welcome to the Venice Women's History Tapes. Today we have a panel of women in fine arts, and all of the women here have lived in the Venice area for some time. All of the women here today also have been given a sheet of questions, except Barbara, I guess, to address themselves to at this time.
Hello, I'm Arleen Goldberg Hendler. I'm a painter, and I moved to Venice in 1963.
Hi, my name is Gilah Hirsch. I'm a painter. I've lived in Venice since 1972.
My name is Susan Weinberg. I'm also a painter. I've been in the Venice area for about 7 years.
My name is Julie McDonald. I'm a dancer, teacher, and I've lived in Venice for approximately 6 years.
I'm Barbara Marfori. I'm a sculptor. My family moved to Venice in 1956.
I'm Claire Falkenstein. I live in Venice since 1963. I'm a sculptor.
I'm Sandra Mendelsohn Rubin. I'm a painter, and I've lived in Venice approximately 28 of my 33 years.
I'm Emily Winters Cordova. I'm a billboard painter, actually a fine art painter and graphic artist, and I've lived in Venice since 1963. That's about 18 years.
I would like now to read off the questions that all the women have had at their disposal, except Barbara, for some time. Why do you live here? Or why did you live here if you've recently moved? Why do you feel you have chosen the field you've gone into? What do you feel it is that you initially wished to accomplish in your field? What do you feel you have accomplished? And what do you feel it is now that you would like to accomplish? How has living and or working here in Venice been instructive or beneficial to your own goals? What conflicts do you perceive to be around your life in the community area of Venice? And how do you deal with these conflicts?
I moved here because I liked the beach and because I wanted to live by the beach. And that was when Venice was very much of an idyllic place, a kind of a forgotten area, a neglected area, and very, very different from what it is now. And culturally, it was an exciting place. There was, the old Pier Avenue area, which is where my first studio was, which is now where the Ocean Park Towers are. There was maybe 20 or 30 artists on that street. I mean, it just was. It was just the best place to find a studio to do your work in. And as far as how Venice has influenced my work, my work is figurative, and I've always been influenced by what's around me and what I see and where I am and all that. So it has definitely gone into my work in terms of the imagery of the beach and of the whole visual. The thing that's been exciting has been, to me, Venice is it was like our town. It's like, the Thornton Wilder play, Our Town or something. It's been, being here all these years, I've always been political. Since I've been 14 years old, I joined the Quakers then, or I went to a Quaker camp, and I've always been kind of a pacifist I grew up during the 50s, during McCarthyism, and I kind of have always had this feeling about somehow wanting to bring together my artistic feelings and my political feelings, and Venice has sort of done that in a way. Now, one way that Venice has been bad for me has been in terms of the Venice being a relaxed community is not the most conducive sometimes to producing work. And I feel that I personally, because of my temperament and my particular personality, have suffered in some ways in that area, in the sense of part of making art, it's a lot of time you put in doing your work. And I think that, I don't know whether I could say it's Venice, maybe it's just raising children and the other things that a woman does, and keeping a home together and all of this. Maybe this is what I could blame more for my lack of production to the level that I expect of myself. Finding myself here as an artist and as a person has been different. I can't imagine being in a regular place, in a regular area. When you leave here, you realize you're not in a regular area. When you go to New York or when you go to downtown or anywhere, you realize that you are living in a community that's not like anything else anywhere. I'm just really very much involved in my painting now, and that doesn't seem to be related to anything that I can, any particular thing. I mean, I relate to my peers, and who do I consider my peers as painters, other painters, and I don't limit it to Venice. It's painters.
First time I came to Venice, I'm originally from Montreal, and I migrated a lot to several countries, and finally got to Los Angeles in '67 to be a graduate student at UCLA. And during that time, I was a TA, and I and another TA were given the responsibility of furnishing the still life for the drawing classes. So this person suggested we go to the exotic Venice to forage around for still life. And we did. We came down here and we went to Rose's Used Everything and to the Bible thrift shops and all the other places that were then on West Washington, which are no longer, and bought UCLA's Still Life Forever. And that day really changed my life in many ways. There was something about coming here at that time that got into my blood and into my psyche, and I could not think of living anywhere else after that. The circumstances hadn't yet changed in my life where I was able to, but several years later, after a studio in Santa Monica, I moved to a classic Venice house on West Washington, and then a couple of years later bought a 1904 duplex, which I've spent 6 years totally redoing, as part studio and part house. What I love about it, in addition to the beach, the king palm trees, the weather, is the sense of so many people creating around me. And even though I don't see them, and even though I may not participate in a group creative action, there is still that sense that seems to pervade all of Venice. It's also a place where one can walk, and that is unusual in our city. And it has a sense of Greenwich Village in the 50s and a sense of Soho in the 70s, yet the visuals and the weather are so much better. I'm a painter. I'm affected by the light, by the water, by the atmosphere, by the environment, by the fog and the light. That totally transformed my painting when I came here, and it still does. The last set of paintings all have to do with an underwater image, and they all have to do with being by the ocean. In terms of questions, I was originally a writer and then a psychology aspirant, and got a degree in English and the next one in art history, and as an art historian I was writing critically about a process that was foreign to me. So I took another degree in painting, and that became lifeblood, and that was the one that had to be pursued. I no longer felt like a hypocrite. I was I was in the process, the creative process. I didn't have to write about it anymore. I could do it.
I moved to Venice when I was in my last year of school. I went back to art school in midlife, and I moved to Venice because I had heard that there were many artists in Venice, and I was looking for an artist community. I happened to move here the year of the nude beach, and I moved right on Clubhouse, right where the nude beach was. And at the time I was living in Van Nuys, and every day I would come from Van Nuys to Venice and be involved in that whole thing and paint, and then go home. And after being in my studio for about a year and going home to Venice every day, I just could not go home anymore. So I left everything and just stayed in Venice. And that's how I happened to get here. Venice has been wonderful for me, absolutely wonderful. Everything that Arleen and Gilah said, of course, pertains to me too. I'm a painter, and the light affects me. For a few years, my paintings were very blue. A lot of sky, a lot of water. I call them my cosmic series of paintings. They had to do with the atmosphere around me. And for the last few years, I've been doing watercolors, some very cartoony kind of watercolors of the people in Venice. I photograph everybody. I just love the people. I guess I fell in love with the people and being near the water. As a child, I went to art school and I always painted, and I wanted to be a painter, and of course my father never would let me do that, so he turned me into a teacher. Mm-hmm. And I became a home economist, and I married a musician who became an insurance agent, and we lived in the valley and had 3 children and that kind of thing, and it really just did not suit me at all. I felt very uncomfortable. I was sick most of the time when I lived in Venice, or when I lived in Van Nuys. And when I got to Venice, my sickness went away. That was an amazing thing. I stopped taking all my pills, which was wonderful. I haven't taken a pill since. My painting has just gotten better and better and better. All the tension is gone and all the turmoil is gone. When I lived in Van Nuys, I painted a lot of very angry reds and oranges and bright clashing colors and rather hostile work. And now my work is very quiet and gentle, and that I get from Venice. Right now I feel I'm living in exile because I live in Santa Monica, which is too far away from Venice. I live on the promenade across from the merry-go-round, so it's at least a little bit of the character of Venice. Not really. It's really totally different, but at least it's by the beach. I would like to get back into Venice, but I have a nice studio in Santa Monica. It's big, and I couldn't find one in Venice, but my heart is in Venice, and I keep painting Venice all the time. When I first came to Venice, I was instrumental in starting an organization which we called the Association of Venice Artists, and it never really got off the ground very well and never really went anyplace. And I would like to accomplish that before I leave this area someday, is get an association of artists together again. We never really did get very many artists together. We did some things, but for me at this time, I said before, I feel like I'm in exile. I have no artistic community around me at all. I'm the only artist in that area.
I didn't really make a conscious decision to live in Venice, but I was living in Manhattan Beach with my husband, and we decided that we both wanted a large space, but we didn't know what we wanted to do with this large space. He was a potter, and I've been a dancer my whole life. It's the only thing I've ever done. And we decided we wanted a large space, and we started looking, and Venice was the only place where we thought we might possibly be able to find a building that we could afford to rent. And we found the most wonderful building, which was the original Venice Post Office on Venice Way. And the minute I saw it, I didn't have to go in. I just saw the bougainvillea outside in the back and said, this is it. And we moved in about 6.5 years ago, and we had no idea what we were going to do with the space. We just wanted the space, and we wanted to be by the beach. That was the reason. Venice was perfect. And the rent was very inexpensive at that time. Very inexpensive. I hate to tell you. I can't. It was so cheap for all that space, over 3,000 square feet. But at any rate, we didn't know what we were going to do with the space. And it never dawned on me to open up a dance studio. I have been dancing my whole life, taking class all around the city, in the Valley, in Hollywood, and touring throughout the country. And traveling a little bit and never really finding my niche. I'm not a terrifically competitive person, nor a terrifically aggressive person, and I never felt like I was really cut out for a lot of heavy competitive commercial work. And I really didn't know how I was going to turn my art into something meaningful for myself. At any rate, it happened with the two other people. I have two partners, Nina Lilly and Myrna Garwin, and we decided that the building was big enough and we were going to open up a little dance studio out in front. And three of us got together and raised a little bit of money and decided we were going to do this whole thing ourselves, and it was only going to take us 3 months. But it turned out to be an 8-month project, just building the place. We laid the floor ourselves. We did everything ourselves, down to the last nail. I think we sanded the windows for about 80 hours. And I didn't dance during this whole time. I turned into a worker with my little cap and sanding blocks. We thought if the dance studio wasn't successful, we could open up a hardware store. We got every kind of sanding block and nail and you name it, we've got it. But at any rate, we opened up this dance studio, and the reason we opened up this dance studio was because we wanted to do something different. We wanted to provide a beautiful environment for people to come and experience the joy of moving. We did not want to create a professional, quote, dance studio that was geared just for the professional dancer, and a place where we could turn the non-dancer on to moving, but still give them high-quality classes. And that's what we went for. And it started out very, very small, and I don't know how it happened, but I think that the reason that Venice was so wonderful was as we were building this for 8 months, we attracted a lot of attention. And on our first day of opening, we had full classes because people were very curious about what we had been doing in this space for so long. And it was that sense of community that made me really appreciate Venice more and more as the time went on. And I was the only one who lived there. I lived in the building and worked there for the past 4 or 5 years. I just moved out a year ago, and I'm an exile as well. I hate to say it, I'm living in the peninsula, but that's where I am. It's a bike ride away. But it's part of Venice. It is Venice address, actually. And in the past few years, we opened up another little studio in the space next door, which we did not build ourselves this time. We've opened up a little boutique where you can get dance wear. I think the thing that I want to talk about, the only problem that I've had artistically is, since it's a business, is maintaining that fine balance between being a commercial business and being an artist as well. And I feel that's a very fine line, and that we've been able to maintain that feeling of art, and as well run a somewhat successful business, and provide people with a lot of joy in experiencing moving. It really excites me. I see 2 women here whose daughters go to the studio, and Maryjane's been going there for years, and I feel that it's been a real beneficial thing for the community. When we first started, there was nothing like it. There was no dance studio, and now there's quite a bit of other things in the area. But I really like the feeling of community, and I think Venice is the closest thing to the feeling that I had when I was growing up, of people supporting one another. I like all the weirdos that walk by there, and in a certain sense, it's been a hindrance. That's my one concern, is the crime that's risen. As far as my business goes, I've had to take a lot of measures to protect the space, and that's been the only thing that really concerns me. One negative factor is the rising crime. I feel the only thing that I would like to accomplish further is more involvement in the community, and maybe some performances. Room to Move as a studio has never done any performances, and that would be a very good thing to do. And I think that in the future, I'd like to be able to present dance more openly to the community. And
I ended up in Venice because my family found a 3-bedroom house for $65 a month for Boston Beach in 1957. And he worked at Douglas Aircraft on Ocean Park Boulevard, which is no longer there. And that's how I ended up here. I never realized really how wonderful it was to grow up here in Venice, except the joys of the beach and swimming and that sort of thing. But not until my late teens, early 20s, did I begin to see how this community sort of enriched my life. And there was a very sort of subtle influence of creativity that maybe I wouldn't have had if I didn't live here. I don't know. That's a hard question. But I mean, I've always loved to work with my hands, but somehow growing up by the beach and the air and the light, as the painters say, and it breeds creativity in a way. I didn't really think of myself as an artist until my early 20s. I always loved to work with my hands, but I never thought, this is fine art. I never thought, I am an artist. Until I was sitting with a group of women one time at my son's daycare center, and she said, I'm going to throw this art show, and I want you to put something in there. And I said, oh, wonderful. I have something for you. And that was the beginning of the shows. That was the beginning of sort of saying, well, I'm going to make something, I'm going to show it to people. Well, I've worked in a lot of mediums. I worked in fabric for a long time. Not a long time, about 6 years. I worked briefly with clay. I worked briefly with plexiglass. And now I'm working in hardwoods. I've been working with wood for about 3-4 years. And I more or less started with figurative work, and now I'm working abstractly. I don't know how that happened. It's just something that I do. And only until recently I started to understand what it is I'm trying to say with these abstractions, but it's very small still. I don't live in Venice any longer. I live in Ocean Park, by the way, which is right next door. Ocean Park is a very creative community. I don't feel like I'm far away from anything. My mother and father still live in the same house I grew up in. And, well, it's been my home for so long, so I don't really feel separate from it. What do I feel I've accomplished? That's a big question. The only thing I can say about that is that I'm still working. I think that's a miracle. And what I would like to accomplish, I suppose, is to satisfy something inside myself. And that is very, very difficult. Because a person sees his own flaws like you're looking under a microscope. And I think each person is their biggest critic. And so I would like to continue getting better, I guess that's all I can say.
I was born in Oregon and on the coast. And when I was 12, I went to San Francisco, well, the Bay Area, grew up and developed there in San Francisco. Later, I went to Paris and lived there for 13 years. decided to come back home and decide, where will I go? And I decided, no, I'm not going back to San Francisco. I'm going to go to Southern California, to Los Angeles. And a lot of the reason was I'm a sculptor, and I had an intuitive feeling, or maybe a real feeling, or a real knowledge that things were happening in Los Angeles and building, and there'd be possibilities for sculptors. So when I got here, I hadn't driven for 13 years. I'd been going in taxis or buses or metro in Paris, and I bought a car, an old car, a second-hand car, big old DeSoto, and started driving around. And I had to learn to drive again, and I went to a real estate agent. I have to have a place to build a fountain. And I don't know where or how, but it better be in a place where I won't be thrown out, because it's going to be big, and because she started talking about houses with backyards, and I said, no, that wouldn't do. And so she said, well, I guess you better get a commercial place. So probably we'd better go to an industrial area. And so we began looking at industrial. I said, no, this is terrible, the air. I couldn't stand the air because I'd had a history of asthma, and I didn't want any kind of industrial area. So she said, I know the place. There's a lot on the beach in Venice, and it will suit you very well. And this lot proved to be the one I'm living in now, because I took my first payment for the fountain, for the commission, and put it down on that lot. I was staying with people, I won't name them, and when I went home, I said, well, I put my money down on a lot, $2,000 on a lot. They said, what? Don't you know there are all these people around there ready to take your money in it? And who knows if they're honest and so on. Well, it turned out they were honest, and it worked out. And another thing, my spirit is with Asia, and here I was looking out towards China, and I love that. So Venice is more than just a community, or it's like the edge of the United States looking out towards Asia, and to me that's kind of a spiritual commitment toward a new world. We're not looking towards Europe, but we're looking towards a total new attitude. Anyway, that's why I'm here. And so as time went on, I earned my money. I had to earn every cent to build this place. And I first built the studio, had one commission, and then I lived in the studio for a while, and then I had another commission, and then I built the house. And I had to demolish, of course, and it was in 1963 when urban renewal was here. So I would have lived in that old house forever, but they wouldn't let me. They said, no, you can't. You have to demolish it or bring it up to code, which would have cost about, how much? $10,000. And I thought, well, why do that? So I tore it down and started from scratch. And what has happened on my lot, which was 30 feet by about 190, I've used every inch of it, and it's turned out to be a miracle. It's just marvelous. You're all invited. Anyway, so that shows you why I'm there and why I like it. And I'm right on the beach. I'm on the boardwalk, and of course it's a constant kind of spectacle of skaters and so on, and I don't like the skaters because I'm a bicycler, and so they go skating, and they're always breaking the law. They're out there on the bicycle path. But in the meantime, I have had no problem, and because I'm gregarious, I like the people, and I've had no problem. I have been robbed once. But in 18 years to have been robbed once, you can be in Beverly Hills, you can be robbed several times. So as far as I'm concerned, I am what I am, and it shows me. And whether it's a blessing or whatever, it couldn't have happened otherwise. So, I mean, there was no choice. I think probably to evolve techniques of concept and realization. That's the only thing I can think of that I wish to accomplish and have accomplished to a degree. And to work through my feelings and, as I say, my solar plexus and my brain. And so even though the whole panorama of people are there, and I'm in a community, still I'm within my own feelings and my own self, and which is kind of like a complete whole from the time I was born until I'm now. I mean, I haven't changed. I'm just what I am from the total action and reaction of my life. And I just hope that Venice will allow us to continue, that it doesn't become a new Miami with high-rise. I just hope that we can hang on to the land, and that's where the community counts. That this community may obstruct that commercial is my hope.
I grew up in Venice, and I've lived for the past 13 years, not more than a mile from my childhood home, which is in the Oakwood area, across the street from the Oakwood Playground. I still go by there every once in a while and kind of look at the place. And it's a very familiar place to me, Venice. I guess the reason that I live here now is when I first got the apartment that I lived in, it was very cheap. And it's right half a block from the beach. And it was just a perfect place to live. The rent is just perfect. And it was really for financial reasons. And I guess also that I would choose to look in the Venice area because it is a familiar place for me to be. And since I've been living there, it's been real inconvenient for me to move in that the rent has pretty much stayed the same, and it's still pretty cheap, and it's a half a block from the beach. And I must say I'm still there. It's small, but it's okay. Now, I would say I agree with Claire, but I don't really feel that I chose the field that I'm in. It's just been a process of evolution and of elimination more than anything, and things have just kind of unfolded as a result. I'll go back to when I was a child. I did take some art classes when I was a child. My mother was very conscientious about having her children take classes of various kinds. The art classes I had were really non-structured kinds of things where you just made things. It was really more just okay, kids, here's the stuff and do your thing. But it did expose me to just making things. My father was a plumber, and all the time that I grew up, I remember houses being in construction, remodeling, and building, and tools were around. So I was exposed to tools. And I used to say for years that I wanted to be a plumber, which everybody thought was very funny. So obviously I didn't go into plumbing. And my mother used to do a lot of cooking and sewing and knitting, and so I'm sure I gravitated towards the things that were accessible to me through my mother. As I grew up in my adult life and moved out of the house, those were the things that I turned to with my obsessiveness. I did a lot of cooking, a lot of sewing, knitting. I still do some of those things and enjoy them very much occasionally. But then I really ran out of steam with that, and finding my certain amount of feminist awareness and really rejecting those things as something to be satisfied with as an end in themselves. So I took a couple classes at City College and kind of got turned on to making things again. I made these constructions which I painted elaborately, and when that ran out of steam, it just seemed like I didn't want to make things anymore. I wanted to really do something where I could express what was going on in my head. And that's when I decided to go back to school as an artist, and to I went back to school in my mid-20s just with the idea that I would go all the way through and get my degree, and I didn't really have a definite idea of what I would do. But it was at that time that I took a couple classes that started painting representationally, and everything just fell into place. And I've been painting representationally since, just working ferociously to get my skills together to be able to express what's in my heart and what's in my mind. And I think that is now happening. Things are really unfolding in my work. It's going very well, and I wanted to express myself as a woman to come to terms with these awarenesses about myself in society, my own viewpoints about things. And through representational painting, I've been able to do that. I think the thing that I initially wished to accomplish was really not only to express myself in my work, but also to be self-sufficient. I had been working all these earlier years at different kinds of jobs to support myself and to keep things going, all of which were very unsatisfying, working for someone else, not making enough money to really make it very worthwhile, with no future. And so the real desire for me, not only in going back to school to be an artist, was also to be able to be self-sufficient at what I chose to do. And that is now starting to happen. So what I feel I have, or what I feel I initially wanted to accomplish was to not only do my work, but also to support myself doing it. And this year that is happening. I think the thing that I would like to accomplish now is just really to continue working and to continue growing in the work and to have that take me wherever it will take me. It's brought me here and will bring me many other places, I'm sure. I think living in Venice, seeing as I spent the major portion of my life here, has really been very crucial in that it's a really familiar place to me. And all my childhood memories are here. With the weather changes come images from my past. The environment is extremely familiar to me. I look around at it. I use that as subject matter for my work. And I don't really feel too much of a distance from just looking out the door and saying, I'll paint that or I'll paint that. It just seems like a real familiar place. But it has really been a very valuable place for me to have stayed for all these years. I think watching it change, I think the only thing that I feel is an obstacle right now is the influx of people. It's just incredible, and it does really change the feeling of the community. To go for a walk on the oceanfront walk is no longer what it used to be, especially on the weekends. And I would say that maybe that's the only obstacle that I feel is the quantity of people and what that brings.
I was raised by the water in the Midwest on the Mississippi River, and I've always been wanting to live by the water. I like being in the water, I like looking at it, I like everything about it. And I ended up coming out here to the West Coast because I felt I wanted to be away from what I felt at that time, the oppression of my family. And I ended up in Venice because my husband at that time and I happened to know some people who lived in Venice. That was a way to acclimate ourselves to Los Angeles. And I, coming from a small community, felt the community of Venice. And I've always liked living here, and I've remained here. I've been through a lot of changes since I came here. I've in the process of raising 2 children in Venice. They're native Venetians. And I went through a long period, I went through divorce here, and I've gone through a long period of poverty and trying to figure out how to raise these children. I found child care so prohibitive that commissions would not pay for the child care to do the commission, to get that sort of thing rolling. And I tried all sorts of things, and I learned a lot. I became aware that I have no business sense. But I've always been drawing. I love to draw, and I've, like several of you have mentioned, I've always considered myself an artist. I don't know when that decision was ever made. But I did find that the community here kept me going. My children have been raised with other children here. They have families that they call their Venice cousins that are still here. And we now have to worry if they're going to be drafted, that kind of thing. I got involved in the politics of Venice, and I got my political education here through the canal struggle. The initial struggle was an eye-opener to me. I eventually went into commercial art, which I thought I would never do, as I've always considered myself a fine artist. But I really don't see a lot of difference, and I think it's been very good for me. I think my skills have expanded tremendously. I've worked commercially at painting. It's opened up my palette to a tremendous amount of colors. I've been working in graphics in television, and that's been very exciting. But I've found myself very little time for my community that I'd gotten to be very involved with, so I joined the Beachhead Collective in hopes to do a lot of artwork, but I ended up doing all the work that one does in a volunteer situation, distribution and putting the paper together and the typesetting, and being a full-time working mother, and especially working 2 jobs, I just didn't have time to do the artwork I'd like for them. I find that in Venice, I've learned that your own environment and art and your art are hand in hand. And your art is what you do. Your art is where you are every day. And I think that comes through. Many of you have commented about that. But I also think in the people. I'm very impressed with the people who have struggled to maintain this community so all of us can stay here. If it hadn't been for a lot of those people, there'd be high-rises all on this ocean front. And I'm going into a new situation now where I'm going to have more time. And I'm hoping that I can do a series of Venice folk heroes, because I think they deserve it. That's what I hope to accomplish. I hope that I can put all the things that I've found from this particular community together. It's been gelling for a long period of time, and I'm now getting into the commercial field where I'll have more time. The biggest thing that has held me back is time. I feel the pressure of I am the sole support of 2 children. They add to my life, and I know that they've enriched my life, but it's also been, I find it very difficult to be as creative as I would like. I'm hoping that I will be able to get all this into a visual form in the next few years, because I think it's extremely important. It's a unique community that when I go on the other side of Lincoln Boulevard, it's different, and I think that I know I won't find it anywhere else.
In the research that I did for these panels of women artists, that I could not come across personally myself, except that Claire may be an exception to this actually, any women artists that lived in Venice and called themselves artists in the 50s. It wasn't until the mid-60s. When did you move here?
63.
Yeah. About 1965, I didn't know that you were here that early, that was kind of my turning point in my research, I called it. That there were all of a sudden women artists, a few, not a great deal.
I was a student at UCLA in the 50s and graduated or got my MA in 62, but I had studios in the area, and I think I was one of the only women on that street. But there were, Helen Lundberg, and there are a lot of LA women artists, or a few LA women artists. What I remember was the Venice West Coffee House, which was poetry and jazz, and it was the beatnik era and POP, and opened up one summer, and the Gas House And no, I don't remember meeting very many, there weren't any painters. Until feminism, the first women's artists meeting that I was invited to, which was, and then Gilah, the women artist group that formed in Venice, that Barbara and that Maryjane and Gilah and Barbara Marfori, who was here, and Emily, and was a collective, which was a very supportive group, which was like a family. It was like a very supportive group of women artists. But before that, those were the first two things where I identified as a women group. But when I was in school and as I was developing as an artist, I never thought of women or men. I really thought of just art. And I was considered, I didn't feel oppressed. I wasn't a person that felt oppressed. I just never thought about it. I just was one of the boys, really, was what it was, And that's how it was. And I never thought anything was wrong with that. And my thing, and I still don't really, because I think art is non-sexual or it's like, it's what it is. So that never bothered me. The part that got to me in feminism was the inequality in terms of family and distribution of work and all the rest of it, but not the art part.
I don't think that anyone would say that the art part has sex, because our heroes are Michelangelo and so on, but the thing that gets to you is discrimination in the possibilities to do your art and to expose your art and for recognition. And it has come to me quite recently. I never thought much about it either. I was so busy working, and suddenly you find that this is so, especially when the main museum of Southern California will exclude women from art of the 60s, which is happening just now. And when that happens, you can be sure that it is not sexless. It is full of sex. I was just there at a conference for the Women's Caucus, the National Women's Caucus in San Francisco. I just came from there. In fact, I was one of the honorees. I don't know whether you knew that.
I didn't know that. That's great.
Anyway, the Women's Caucus, it was the first time I was with, totally women. And all this hair. And it was beautiful, really, and very stirring, and very, how would you say, the ceremony, the whole thing was unbelievably stirring and important. Anyway, at the meeting, this letter was distributed, and that letter was telling the women that this exhibition had just been organized without one single woman in it, art of the 60s. And so now I know that something is brewing for some kind of exposure. I don't know what'll happen, but it's the only, what can we do except expose it and say how it was?
Right, yes, please.
I was at that conference too. I was on one of the panels, and I had to miss that particular ceremony. I was at the beginning, and I had to leave because I was in something else at that time. But I didn't know about this art of the 60s business, but hearing you say this reminds me of the whole way that I got into the whole women artist thing in 71, where the County Museum was having the Art and Technology show. And at that time, we organized the LA Council of Women Artists, and we just protested all over the place. We wrote to the Times. I was on television a lot. We were having talks with Tuckman and with Donahue, and it's because of that group, and we were quite a group. We got up to about 500 women at that time, that the women's show took place several years ago, that great historical show. The Lyndon Auckland show. No, the Lyndon Auckland show at the County Museum.
5 centuries,
yeah.
400 years.
Right. We at that time got that promised to us. There were 3 of us sitting with Donahue and with Spear and the various trustees, and that was promised to us at that time. Now, one of the things that has happened, I've been on several panels during this year where at each occasion there is a caveat brought up saying women don't relax. It doesn't matter what you did 10 years ago, but the situation has grown worse and worse, and do something again. And hearing what you just said prompts me again to raise arms about it, but it must be done. It really has to be done.
They met on the weekend about it, and I was interviewed in San Francisco because I'm having an exhibition in Palo Alto at the Smith Anderson Gallery, and I spoke about it, and it's in print, and so I'm going to have to give this article to them because it's out in print, and I say it. And it's really the first time I've ever spoken like this.
Yeah.
But I feel that it's time to speak.
This is what it is. It seems as though it's never over. I remember that 71, and you think, there are more women in galleries, there are more women in shows, and it's a constant thing. It's very similar to what we've had in terms of stopping the development in Venice, the right-of-way to here, or the tearing down of, and you are constantly having to protest, and to go over the same thing over and over again, and that's what seems to be discouraging. But then again, there are many more women in shows.
Proposition 13 saved me.
Did it?
Really, unbelievable. It was going up 100%, 200%, 300%.
So how did it stop your taxes?
Well, what it did was to establish an entirely new basis of taxing. And, of course, there were all those who said, it only helps the rich, it doesn't help the poor. Well, that wasn't true.
Emily, to me, personifies a real community artist. I feel that very much. I don't know anybody who embodies the two more.
Quite a number of things happening. In that there is a small group of people who appeal building permits and there are many that try to slide by that are really detrimental to us. I think as artists, we're just discussing no women in this show of the 60s being planned at the County Museum. It has to take a community action that we have to consider doing something toward, either writing a letter or joining a picket line or being part of the planning as to what plan should be taken. But it's part of our environment as artists that when these things are happening, and if it's something that really concerns us, such as women being excluded from this show, then I think that should take a certain priority. And
carry our environment with us, so that even though I'm not active in the Venice community, I think I carry that spirit of Venice with me when I go out into other communities, or when I was, for example, I was an artist in residence in London for a while last year and brought Venice with me, and they didn't believe it. They couldn't believe that it was possible to live a life that we live here. This is paradise. Yeah. And I couldn't wait to get back here.
Association of Venice Artists that we started 6-7 years ago, and our goal was to create an art center, a drop-in art center where anybody could come and do whatever it is they wanted to do, whether it was dance or paint or sculpt, etc. But the artists could never get together, and this is always the problem.
I think we might also have in common that we're attracted to it because of the diversity of people and the freedom that almost everybody I've talked to, mentions that, the uniqueness and the reason somehow Venice does attract, or people come here to either escape some other conforming place or because they feel they can express themselves individually here. I have a really strong belief in the uniqueness of each individual, and Spark has helped me in terms of, I now have this children's art workshop here at Spark, which it's kind of come together in terms of becoming my political or my social mark on changing things, which is kind of giving to children as I had as a child. And I know Sandra mentioned that she had some vague art lessons as a child, and the teacher didn't do very much, but she remembers making things, and I really think that's important. I think that in a child's education, just having that experience and learning art and doing art and making art and so I'm doing it. I'm very happy doing it. I find it's obsessive. I've been doing it for a long time, and I complain about teaching and all this, and I'm always, there's always problems with it. But I'm now accept it as a really drive that I have to set what my real dream is, a Barnsdall Children's Art Center in Venice.
It wouldn't even have, we could even have a rotating situation where not one person would be doing the classes all the time, but just to send out a roster of so-and-so will do 2 weeks, the next person 2 weeks, next person 2 weeks. That sounds really good to me, I would sign up.
Right. I was just going to say, that's a very effective way of doing something. We just started doing something like that at the studio where the biggest complaint among all the teachers there, very creative people, was that we never got together to take class from each other. So we just set up a rotating schedule where every other week one teacher gives all the other teachers a class. And it's very exciting, and it works.
Oh, very much for attending tonight. It's really been wonderful to have you all here and speak your thoughts of the evening. And